Okay, welcome back. So the next portion of our agenda is number 12, Administration Office. Shirley?
Good afternoon. We're doing the 2015-16 mid-year report. Basically, this mid-year is a little different than any other. Normally, it's a pretty boring first half of the year, and we just talk about where revenues are and what expenditures are in relationship to the budget. Unfortunately, this year has been anything but normal, with the fire occurring right the next day after final budget hearings. So we're going to be talking about the mid-year report and where we are. We're going to talk about and bring up the adjustments that were made to the adopted budget right after the adoption of that budget. Basically, the budget status as of December 31st, 2015, and what the impact on the current year's budget will have on next year's budget, what impact of the fire will have on next year's budget. We'll go through some recommended mid-year budget adjustments that were included in the mid-year report. We'll talk about 16-17 budget planning, review the budget principles and the budget instructions. Mary Rose is going to take you through the first part of the PowerPoint, and then I'll be picking up from there, breaking in some new.
Just breaking me in then.
You're not break computer, that's okay.
Okay, so just a brief overview of the adopted budget. On September 22nd, we adopted, or 2015, we adopted the budget with fund appropriations of approximately $134 million amongst all funds, and revenues at about $111 million. The appropriations for the general fund at that time were $43 million, and revenues were about $40 million. At adoption of budget, our teeter transfer to balance the budget was $978,000. That was a reduction. If you recall, from our 13-14 fiscal year, we had used approximately $3.8 million of teeter to transfer over to balance the budget. And in 14-15, we had budgeted about $1.8 million of teeter to transfer the budget. So we were slowly reducing at budget adoption back in September. To date, we have no draw on contingencies. However, obviously with the mid-year adjustments, we are going to be doing some reduction. And our draw will be about $205,000, reducing our contingencies to about $995,000. And Shirley will go into that when she gets into budget adjustments. So as Shirley spoke briefly about, we had obviously some Butte Fire adjustments that were done immediately after budget adoption. We increased appropriations by $10.7 million. If you see the breakdown, and also our revenues for the $10.7 million. If you see the breakdown, FEMA was about $8 million we budgeted, an increase to revenue. Our CDAA, the state cost, the state allocation is $2 million, and then our county share of costs, that 6.25% that we're always talking about, we took that from teeter, and that was put in at the $673,000.
And that was just the estimates right at the end of September. So remember, we needed to put appropriations and revenues into the budget so we could start capturing those cost items in a separate budget unit, and those were what were estimated at the end of September.
Yes, and additionally, RCRC, we received additional $150,000 grant monies to help disaster victims, and we increased our appropriations to reflect that. In conversations with the auditor, we moved $1.5 million worth of revenue and appropriations. We transferred that from our to our capital projects fund for our information technology infrastructure. And so with those technical adjustments for the Butte Fire, our appropriations are now at about, general fund appropriations are about $52 million. Our revenues are estimated at about $49 million. And as Shirley said, those are estimates only at this time. And then it should be noted that those adjustments are taken into account when we're going over these next couple of slides. So as of December 30th, 2015, if we're looking at revenue, our revenues are coming in at about $19 million, about 39.8% of our general fund revenues received. Our property taxes, which is our largest source of revenue, has been received as expected. However, the assessor is processing roll corrections and calamity claims as a result of the fire. So our final revenues and taxes may be less than budgeted come the end of the fiscal year. Our sales and use tax is actually doing pretty well. We're about 4% over what we budgeted, about $85,000 above what we are expected at mid-year. We're projecting, if this trend continues, to have about 170 over what we budgeted for the sales and use tax. However, we're trying to figure out how the sales and use tax increase, what's happening with this. We could think that it's potentially with the debris removal crews here within Calaveras County, if that's adding to the sales and use tax increase. Our TRT and property transfer taxes, they're also up. Our TOT is up about 13% over performing better than we expected, and our property transfer taxes are also performing better than expected. Our building and septic permits are doing well. And with all of this increase, we just want to remind you that we can't really pinpoint of what the increase is. It could be simply due to what's going on in the Butte Fire recovery effort. We've already received our PG&E franchise fees for the second half of the year. Or excuse me, the PG&E franchise fees we're going to be receiving in the second half of the year. Something to take note, our intergovernmental revenue for state is at above where we would see it at mid-year, and this is due to the CDAA money that we've already received coming in from the state. Additionally, the 50% of VLF revenue that we receive, we generally get that in January. It was actually received in December of this year, so that's reflected there in our intergovernmental revenue at state.
Sorry, can I ask
Yes,
a question? So your intergovernmental revenue state, you said it was CDA.
Yes, so back when we talked about our Butte Fire adjustments,
We received a $3 million advance
Yeah, I remember
from
that.
CDAA, and so that's why the revenue for intergovernmental revenue state is at 6.2. Between the $3 million advance we received on the CDAA funds that we will be billing against, and the VLF revenue that we usually get posted in January and May was posted in December, and will be also posted in April. And
Yes.
that's why it shows.
So is that something that we would normally do? Because isn't CDAA related to the Butte Fire?
It is. That's the California Disaster Assistance Act funds. If you remember back when in September, October, at the beginning of the fire and the process, we were able to get an advance
Yeah.
against what future reimbursements from the state on. So any expenses that come in that are related to the fire that will be covered under the CDAA grant will be deducted first from the $3 million we've already received.
All right. Yeah.
So it was an advance against future costs.
Okay. So I guess I'm a little confused. The fact that, I thought that the fire issues were going to be separate from our regular budget.
The fire issues it's all recorded as part of the general fund. It is within its own separate budget unit within the general fund, just like interdepartmental or the assessor's office or the auditor's office. Its many funds make up the general fund, but because those costs are ultimately the 6.25%, if that's what it ends up being, the accounting cost, are general fund dollars that will have to pay for that. And so when the auditor's office set up the budget unit, which is 1010-900, for the Butte Fire, it is in the overall general fund.
Okay.
So the FEMA revenues are also reflected there in the intergovernmental revenue federal. However, obviously we haven't received any of those funds, and so that is why you're seeing the large, only 2% coming in as received for the federal revenue that we received, because we will be getting the 8 million. Yes, sir.
No, we've actually applied for reimbursement on the FEMA funds. Do we have any idea how much we've applied to date?
So this has been a long and arduous process. We have been trying to nail down the projects related to the Butte Fire. And so we've worked with every department that has been impacted with this recovery and with the original emergency response. Everything from the Sheriff's Department requesting mutual aid to the debris removal process that occurred through Public Works to projects that haven't started yet. We've had to coordinate those efforts and put projects together and submit them to FEMA. Once they're submitted to FEMA, then they go through their chain of review. And so that is still in the process. So there are a few projects that have been approved and entered into FEMA system, but there are still projects that have not. So at this point, we haven't received any funds from FEMA at all. They're going to go back and look at what they have approved in terms of projects compared to what the state is going to fund 100% of. And then they're going to start looking at the $2.9, almost $3 million that we received in advance and start applying that portion of those funds to the FEMA portion that they're going to give us. So this is going to be, this is why when I said, I think I said it the day before, the day before the fire happened, I said if we were ever to have our rim fire, it could take anywhere between 18 and 24 months before we saw a penny from FEMA. So the dollars that we're receiving, that we have received, have been straight from the state. So at this point, that's what we are working off of. And then it will be, you know, it's hard to tell when we're going to receive any funds from FEMA. But at this point, they're going to look at the almost $3 million that we received from the state, and until we get through those funds entirely, we're not going to get any future funds from FEMA. So at this point, once we switch over to the federal projects, those are not advanced as much as they're depending on the size of the project, we may get the funds and close it out, or it may be more of a reimbursement type process.
Mutual aid costs from other departments as far as fire and public safety and law enforcement, are they billing FEMA on their own, or do we have,
No.
they bill us, we pay
That
them?
all goes through us, and we are only handling law enforcement. Fire is not going through us.
So actually, all the outside agencies of law enforcement bill Calaveras County. Have we
Yes.
written them a check yet?
No.
Okay.
No, we didn't. And the reason that we haven't is that we needed to wait until FEMA had actually approved the project related to emergency protective measures. And once that occurred and we're on the same page with FEMA, then we can actually start going through all of the claims. But again, the process is that we have to validate the claims that we've received with the information that was collected through the California OES as well as our local OES to determine that the dates that we are being, the dates that are in the claims from the mutual aid respondents are in line with the dates that we have here and the dates that California OES had in their mutual aid system as well.
And the dates that we have on the contracts with,
Correct.
those law enforcement agencies that provide mutual aid and the other agencies that provide the mutual aid to the county.
Dates and tasks.
Yes. Okay. Just a couple things to note before we move on. Our other financing sources, we're reflecting it as a low percentage, and we're going to kind of go into detail about that later on, but we did a change of accounting procedure, showing it as a negative expenditure versus a revenue. So we'll talk about that, but we're still receiving, it's our chargebacks, reimbursements between departments. It's just a change in accounting procedure and how we're doing that. And then the operating transfers we are not going to be doing the teeter transfer until the end of the year, and so that's why it's a little bit less than, yes.
And we generally talk about it's only the teeter transfer and operating transfers in, but there are many funds that are transferred in, and those funds are restricted. And so we will find, I think, in a great number of cases that we will not be transferring all of those funds in from any of those designated sources because the work just wasn't done associated with those restrictions on those funds. You know, if we had all had our crystal ball back when we did the original budget, we wouldn't even be here today. So, because we would have known ahead of time what everything was going to happen. So when the budget's first put together, it's best guess at that time. So whether you're talking about AB 443 for the Sheriff's Department or AB 109, or you're talking about SB 678, or you're talking about teeter, those amounts were budgeted based on the best information that we had at that time when the budget was passed. So as operations continue, it is very likely that all of those funds will not be transferred in, just because they don't need to be.
So in doing a comparison from last year at this time to this fiscal year, taxes are where they're to be expected given at the time we had an increased assessed evaluation when the property rolls closed on June 30th. However, like I stated previously, the revenues from that could decrease once the assessor does the correction. And then the most significant difference, obviously we spoke just about the intergovernmental and the state revenues coming in, and then what we just spoke about in the other financing sources, the operating, the change in accounting procedure for that. But we're pretty much where we were last year.
Quick question.
Yes.
We changed accounting procedures.
Yes, sir.
What did we do and why?
So that was my call on doing that. We had received an audit finding in the June 30th, 14 audit of, they didn't specifically spell out what the problem was, but in talking to Smith & Newell, which is the grand jury auditor that audits the county on an annual basis, there was a duplication of expenditures that were being counted. And this is goes way back before I do. You know, I was even here. What was occurring is if one department did work for another department, or one department purchased materials for another department, instead of the recipient department paying for the staff or paying for that invoice, there would just be a chargeback between the two departments. I would tell you, Mike, you owe me $100, and we would do a journal entry between your department and my department. The problem was how it was being done is it was not actually, it wasn't abating the expense. And so the expense was many times being counted twice. So what we got written up for was duplication of expense. So when we did the 15-16 budget, I had thought, well, let's figure out how we can do this. And I looked at several departments and figured we could do a more like a transfer in, transfer out type scenario, and then it wouldn't be a double entry of an expenditure. That worked for most departments, but it didn't work for a department like Health and Human Services Agency, and it didn't work for the Public Works Department. So they still needed to capture the expenditure, not like a transfer in. They still needed to capture that expenditure as part of their project, or that expense as part of their grant. So in their particular circumstances, they still absolutely had to show an expense. They couldn't show a transfer. So that just completely blew a hole in my idea on how to rectify the situation. So what we did is we set up a different accounting mechanism where we would actually abate the expense. So if I had salaries and benefits paid in my department for my staff, but we did work for you, I'm going to charge you for that work, you're going to pay for it and you're going to have an expense on your side, and I'm going to show a negative salary and benefit on my side. So all it did is it just abates the expense. So when we do our financial reports at the end of the year, we will only have one expenditure overall instead of two, because it's just going to be an abatement on one end and a charge on the other. So we did want to make sure that the budget aligned with what we're doing in reality, and that's all this is. So it's just moving it from a transfer in type revenue to just negative expenditure, whether it's negative services and supplies or negative salaries and benefits. It's very in line with what Tuolumne County is doing, as well as I looked at several other counties on how they're dealing with this chargeback mechanism. And so we just found a way that we could do it where we're going to meet the needs of the outside auditor and make our financial reports accurate.
Thank you.
When we adopted the final budget, did we update our intergovernmental revenue streams to reflect these numbers? Because this is not the typical budget stream.
It isn't. The intergovernmental state and federal revenues, we updated, if you remember, we came back to the board after after we adopted final budget, and that was when we did that $10 million increase to appropriations and $10 million increase to revenues. The auditor and I worked together based on just some real initial estimates of the overall cost of the fire. What percentage, 75%, would be federal, the remaining 18.75% would be state, and then the 6.25% hopefully would be the county. It was just to get those budget numbers in, and so that once we could start, so we could give to departments who were doing the work and incurring costs, they knew how to charge against those. When you're looking at actual revenues here, again, the reason that the state intergovernmental is so different than the prior year is because of that $3 million advance of CDAA funds and the fact that we got the BLF revenues posted in December versus in where it normally would be in January. So between those two things, that accounts for the significant difference in what we received in intergovernmental revenue in 2014 and what we had received by December of 2015.
Thank you. I wanted to remember that, but I wanted to hear you explain it too.
Not a problem.
And then just the one comment I wanted to make, Supervisor Edson, you had concerns about it being in the general fund. And the reason it's in the general fund, and this is very similar to what other counties do as well, not just for disasters that occur like we've just experienced, but any sort of issues, anomalies. We've even seen where counties have had murder trials, any major events that would kind of blow a hole into a department's regular operating budget. What they do is they create a budget outside of that operational unit so that it doesn't overshadow historical trends just for regular operations. And so when we did this, we created another budget unit in the general fund because ultimately anything that's not covered by federal or state is covered by the general fund. And that's really what this comes down to. So it didn't make sense for us to create a whole separate fund specifically just for the Butte Fire. I would hope that we don't have another disaster like what we're experiencing right now. But we're trying to set up a structure in the general fund that could handle other disasters or other anomalies that could pose an issue to our budget in the future. So that's why that's in the general fund.
Okay. Any questions?
I mean, so when it comes time to estimate, what this thing costs, you can still be able to do that easily.
Absolutely. Yes, because we have one account dedicated to it.
Right. We are tracking all the costs related to the Butte Fire in one budget unit. It's called 1010, 0900, and 10 and 20, I think there's, but it's all the 900 numbers. And all the costs related to the Butte Fire, all the revenue reimbursements related to the Butte Fire go through that budget unit.
Okay.
So, looking at expenditures for this fiscal year, we're actually lower than expected in salaries and benefits. We have about 35 vacant general fund positions, and so that's showing a reduction of the actual use of salaries and benefits. Services and supplies, again, that 19 million that's budgeted there is there due to Butte Fire appropriations. So because we have not actually expended those costs versus the revenue, or we've expended them, we just haven't paid out. Some of those are the mutual aid costs that have been, we haven't paid out yet to the local law enforcement agencies that responded. You're not seeing the actual expenditure there yet. It's there, but it hasn't been actually paid.
Could you go back to salaries and benefits?
Sure. So we're not at 50% of expended at the end of December 30th, and this is due to vacant funded positions. We're at about 35 vacant general fund positions at the moment.
That's correct. And interestingly enough, because there was actually 14 pay dates before December 31st, because that last pay date occurred on December 29th or 30th, just before we went on vacation, you would actually have expected us to be a little bit over 50% if all the positions were filled. But the report I received in February from our HR department showed us that we have 35 vacant positions, which is about 13%, 12.3% overall of the positions. So because we funded those and there are that many vacancies, we have a some significant salary savings at this juncture.
Yeah, that number is the total number of vacancies for the county, correct?
For the general fund, for general funded positions.
Okay, is the sheriff's department 9 open positions part of that?
Yes, it is.
Okay. And one quick question too. I understand that some of the services, you mentioned the reimbursement for law enforcement agencies, and before we said that that was going to come out of FEMA funds we haven't received yet.
It is. What we were saying is that in the appropriation services and supplies appropriations, those are covering a lot of the costs, including the reimbursement to all the mutual aid. Now we could not pay out any of those actual costs until we have all the contracts signed that the project was approved through FEMA. So even though those costs have been incurred by the outside agencies and we have the contracts in place and we've submitted the project to FEMA, we haven't actually written the check.
Okay.
And if we haven't written the check, it doesn't show up.
That's our accounts payable then.
Yeah, that's why it's showing that we've only expended about 28%.
So they're good with a 5 or 6 month wait or longer?
It's no different than us waiting for our reimbursement because of the requirement. We experience the same issue.
Yeah, but I mean, you're talking about the folks that come up here to help us out, right?
Right.
Yeah.
That's what we did on the require. It's the same thing. We're counting the jurisdictions from all over the state, went to Tuolumne County, and you just can't get out until you receive the funding, until you get approval from FEMA. So it's the same issue that we're experiencing. So we're getting closer about being able to write those checks, but we're looking at about $1.4 million in total mutual aid between law enforcement and non-law enforcement mutual aid that's responding.
And law enforcement that provides mutual aid have that understanding. They know going in when they provide mutual aid or when they ask for mutual aid in the case of a disaster. They understand that there is a process that county has to go through that's experiencing the disaster to get that approved and to be able to reimburse them.
Did we get our money from the rim fire yet for mutual aid?
We did.
Okay, good.
Yes.
All right, just checking.
Took us a while. It took some time, but yes. Yeah. So just in comparison of the prior year, as Shirley spoke briefly about, the salaries and benefits over last year compared to December 31st of 2015, you'll see that we're up a little bit over, even with the vacant positions, we're actually expended more than last fiscal year, and that is because of that 14th additional pay date in the first half of the year versus having that in the second half of the year. Overall, our spending is pretty much in line with the previous fiscal year.
So you expect that to come back, right, in the overall fiscal year?
Yeah. Normally with salary benefits and what have you, it just usually happens, there's 13 pay periods in the first half of the year and 13 in the second half, just because of the timing of the holidays, there was that first 14 in the first half of this year.
Yeah, I do have a question about something in personnel. If we have funded positions in our budget, why am I hearing from more than one source that we have a hiring freeze on for funded positions?
It was what the board agreed to when the budget was approved, a recommended budget. And quite frankly, it's just a matter of process. And our HR director is looking at reducing the sheet. It's just so that we can check. We have a methodology to check to ensure that the position that is being requested to be filled is a funded position. Sometimes when a position number comes across or a position comes across, if we don't have a methodology to check to ensure that's a funded position, then it could inadvertently get filled and we have a problem with the budget. We set it up this way because HR doesn't have a copy of all the budgeted employee costs for all the department. That resides in the administration. So when somebody wants to fill a position, they fill out a sheet, which we want to make easy, and one sheet where it also says how they want to advertise for it. It's real simple. You fill it out. Is it replacing a position? Was the person promoted? Was the person resigned? Is this a new position that was just approved by the board? It comes over. I sign out, I check it, make sure that it's in fact a funded position, and we send it immediately, stamp and send it to HR.
That's the procedure we have now?
Yeah.
Okay.
Then HR usually will take it, and they've also gotten from the department how they want to advertise for that position. And that's the thing that I asked our HR director to look at as soon as negotiations were over, is to shorten that into one brief form, and it will allow for, it's just one less piece of paper to fill out. It will still be a very quick process because we try and turn around those as quickly as within 24 hours when they come to our office. Quite often the department brings it to our office, I'll look at it and sign it right then, Karen will scan it and then move it on its way.
So what you're telling me, if we have 9 funded positions in the deputy, in the sheriff's department now. Mm-hmm. So if we were to attempt to advertise for that position, within 24 hours in one sheet of paper or 2 at most?
What I'm saying is if the sheriff's department has somebody resign and they want to refill the position, at the moment there's 2 pieces of paper they have to fill out. One is, it's called the exemption from hiring freeze. And it used to require a whole lot of information. I've been telling departments, all you really have to do is tell me that this was a promotion, a resignation, a new position, whatever. Check the box, put the number in. That comes to me, I sign off on it, verifying that it's a funded position for HR. There's also another form that's filled out, and it says you want to advertise in the Calaveras Enterprise, the Stockton Rec Data, blah, blah, blah. That usually goes directly to HR. So when I'm saying, Supervisor Oliveira, is that when I get the exemption from hiring freeze, that it comes to our office, I turn that around, and I try and turn that around in 24 hours. Oftentimes, I will sign it as soon as it's brought into our office.
Is that really necessary now, do you feel?
It is. It absolutely is. HR does not have a list of the funded position. They do not have the BECs, the budgeted employee costs. So it's very hard for them to know what positions are funded and what positions may not be funded. It's not a lengthy process, and when I was saying we're not trying to combine those two sheets into one, will make it even simpler.
Yeah, why can't we get HR a copy of our funded positions that we need to fill?
We can, but it's not going to speed up the process, because they're still going to have to look up
Should we take this under?
whether or not the funding.
Deal.
I mean, it was just a checks and balance, especially when we had a lot of unfunded positions. They would call me up on the phone and they say, Shirley, is this funded or is it unfunded?
But I
With all
will
due
say,
respect-
I will
with
say,
all due
this
respect,
is why,
folks,
this is
we
why
are
we
in a
have
situation now.
budgeted, this is why we have budgeted employee in the HR system. And we implemented that several years ago. And I think that the missing piece is a checks and balance to ensure that that process is occurring. Because I can run a report out of our financial system and see if a position is budgeted or what level it's budgeted at. The problem is that is not being done, and it's not being audited, and it's not being reviewed on a regular basis. So that's the part that needs to be dealt with. I have seen positions be hired that there was no funding for. I have seen positions that were recruited for that didn't exist. So it is a problem, but there is a mechanism in the software that we have that just needs to be utilized. So, whether it stays as a form or whether it's a process where the administrative office helps coordinate with the HR department to make sure that that is happening, that what happens in the boardroom in terms of positions being approved or at what level they're going to be funded, that there's a coordinated effort with administration to monitor what is entered in the HR system.
But there were also issues with the report and what date you ran the report on basis at what point the new positions were put in there. So there were glitches in the system, and until we could get those glitches worked out, we and the board supported at recommended budget the continued process of the hiring freeze that we have continued to do to ensure that we are not recruiting for positions that have not been funded or approved by the board.
So we need to really take a good long look at what we've done in the past, which was incorrect, and we need to correct that as soon as we can, correct?
I take exception with that, Supervisor Oliveira. What we did in the past was not incorrect. What we did was put into place a method to ensure that we were not filling unfunded positions. A number of years ago, we had, I can't even begin to tell you how many positions on the position control list that were not funded. And we were running into significant problems with departments trying to fill those unfunded positions. We had to have a process in place. This process is not cumbersome. It is not, it is a very good method of checks and balances until we can ensure that the reports that are in IFIS and are run on any date and not with a specific date are accurate, and then HR can use that report or develop, as I said, trying to make it a more compact sheet where all that information is on one piece of paper versus two.
So, as I understand it, and please correct me if I'm wrong, we have an issue with our software. Is that right?
When it was set,
I would say no, and I've proven repeatedly that from a historical standpoint, if you want to run a report from 3 years ago and compare that to the positions that we have today, is it exactly accurate? No, because of the dates. But if you want to look at what are the available positions today, right now, and what they're funded at, what level they're funded at, that information is correct as long based on whatever the user entered.
when I looked through and I found errors, it was user error. It was entry error. It was that the position hadn't even been entered yet, or it was that it wasn't entered until January, or whatever it was, or the same position was entered twice. So I would still make the argument that I've seen that system works with regards to, there's a whole section just on how the position is budgeted. If we want to look at it from let's compare how many positions Department X had 5 years ago, 4 years ago, 3 years ago, 2 years ago, it's hard because one position could have been budgeted 100% one year, and then 50% the next year, and then 25%, and then it's gone. It's still the same position, it just changes the level that it's budgeted at, but that position still exists. So from a historical standpoint, is there a mechanism? We've talked about that. I think we just have to work through that process. And I think we just have to work through the utilization of the software. But in terms of, I use that software right now to determine what my positions are or what they're funded at, or even other departments. So I think you can use it, but it has to be used. And I think there has to be a coordinated effort between, administration, HR, and maybe the auditor's office, well, certainly the auditor's office because of payroll, because we also need to use that information to make sure that what we're getting in payroll matches what was budgeted, matches what the department is submitting. So it's kind of a trifecta coordinated effort, but I think there just needs to be, I think it just needs to have some
Structure.
effort and some structure and some direction.
So this is a problem that can be fixed,
I think that it can.
and it can be fixed relatively easily, correct?
It should.
Here's my concern. I apologize if I'm appearing to put anybody on the spot. We are 9 deputies down in the sheriff's department that I know of. In about 15 days, that may increase to 12 deputies. And our hiring process is going to take a minimum of 9 months. Although we do have some candidates in the academy now, we are never going to be able to catch up to where we're going to reach a level to provide a safe atmosphere for our residents out here within the next year to 2 years. And I'm very concerned about the way we have to fix this problem. And I want to start with the procedure, make sure that we're doing everything possible we can to give the advantage to get this deadline met. And I don't blame you folks. I don't blame anybody here. I want to identify the problem and find a fix for it as soon as we possibly can.
Well, then I would suggest, and I think it has been suggested before, that if you wish, Supervisor Oliveri, that you meet with the administrative office, with Captain Macedo, with the HR director, and we can go over that process. You are correct, it is a lengthy process, but it's not lengthy at this juncture. It is the testing, it is the background checks, it is the recruitment. There's many components to recruiting a deputy that is not required of a lot of the other positions, at least not to that extent. So I think if we can meet, you, Captain Macedo, HR Director Judy Hawkins, and myself, maybe we can see what we can do to shorten that process.
Yeah, fortunately, we have met with HR Director and Captain Macedo on this, and I think we've got a pretty good idea of where some problems may be, and maybe even solutions for them. I would really enjoy having that meeting, and maybe we can find an easy way to at least get the ball rolling downhill.
And then I'll have our business, we'll have our business analyst coordinate with HR and try to isolate what is it that isn't working. Because when I am looking at the information, the only issues I've seen have been easily solved with the changing process.
Well, I would be more than happy to meet and get this taken care of. I think Supervisor Kearney, do you have any comments? I mean,
Yeah, I'm on it. It sounds to me like everybody's working too hard to get this done. And if we look at the solutions, we might eliminate some of that. Supervisor Oliveira's concern is the same as mine. We're teetering on a public safety issue because we are down so many deputies, and this needs to be solved with a priority right now, and that's where I appreciate his concern and where he's questioning. And I'm with him. If you want to talk about it, I'm willing to do that. If you need us to help you, let us know what that is. If we need to facilitate some kind of a process change, we need to do that, because right now we have deputies that aren't.
When do we
They're
start?
going on calls without the backup.
When do we start the recruitment process for our sheriff? Is that the end of this month? The interview process?
The recruitment process has been going on for a while now.
That's at 90 days that we went into, and now we're getting ready to...
I'm going to let our HR director,
Judy Hawkins, HR Director. I am in the process of coordinating schedules with 3 individuals out of the area. And that has been the challenge at the moment, but I'm hoping to have that taken care of prior to the end of this month.
And that is for the ranking panel.
Right, and that is for the ranking panel.
And that's a process that this board instructed you to follow, correct? The 3 interview process? Three people on the interview board? Okay.
You know, we're off topic,
We are.
and so we need to discuss that later, because it's not actually the process. So-
And if I can make a comment on the process, I did have a meeting last week with Rebecca. We had met on some issues regarding processes and the system, IFAS, and our new system that we will be going to. And we talked in length. I think our meeting it was supposed to be an hour, and it went 3 hours, on how we can improve the processes and things that we need to look at and things that we need to get done so we can work smarter and not harder. And so this process is, we are working on this, and yes, we do need to identify some things that we do need to move along faster on, but we did sit down, and I think it was last week, and already started identifying some things in the system and areas that we have to start utilizing that we can move things along a lot faster.
Okay, so what I heard was Supervisor Oliver and Supervisor Kearney going to be a part of that process.
I think the meeting was to discuss recruitment specifically for sheriff deputies and that process of trying to move that through faster. I do not believe it was the process between HR admin and the auditor's office and the use of the system.
Whatever it takes to move it faster. They can be a part of it. It's okay with me.
And Ms. Hawkins, you mentioned that you had a new program, software program or something in our conversation at our meeting we had. Is that the one you were just speaking about?
Well, actually, that did come up in our conversation. One of the things that we are looking at is an applicant tracking program, and we're looking at 2 different applicant trackings, one of them being NeoGov, so that we can, department heads, managers can look at their applicants through the system and not have to make appointments and come and sit down in our office. So these are things that would help speed the process. And then also applicants are able to apply in a, I don't know if it's always an easier manner depending on how well you are on a computer, but they can apply online, and then we can track things in a more efficient manner, and then being able to set up the interviews and then track all of the information. And then we can also track matrix on how long it takes at each step of the process in hiring the individuals, and then we can set goals to improve on those matrix.
Thank you.
So I'm going to apologize for taking this off topic and asking about the hiring freeze. Ask Supervisor Oliveira to coordinate a meeting, and I'd love to come to it also. And maybe we can get back to dollars and cents now.
Okay.
So that we're not here till midnight doing that.
Any other questions on the comparison?
No, but thank you for entertaining the one we did.
Thank you. Appreciate the staff.
So just looking at our general fund expenditures by function, all function groups are actually expending slightly less than 50% where they should be at the 50% mark at mid-year. With the exception, obviously, of our other department category, and our other department category is that Butte Fire budget unit. So the appropriations, like Shirley says, we have not actually cut the checks yet for those appropriations. So that's why the expense is at 20% as opposed to closer to the 50% mark.
And just so you know, that other departments, though, is not solely the new fire, it's insurance, it's those that don't fall into the other categories, and the insurance is one of the ones in one department.
So just in summary, our revenues are below our target. We're at about close to 40% of the budget. Property tax apportioned as expected. Year-end revenue may be less because of the Butte fires as the assessor doing the roll corrections. Our local sales and use tax, TOT, property transfer tax are performing better than expected. Our building and septic systems are performing well. VLF, we received the 50% of the revenue in December as opposed to January. And we've already received the an advancement of $3 million in OCDA funding. Our expenditures are also slightly less than we appropriated, and all of our functioning groups are expending less than the 50% mark.
I have a quick question, and I don't want to get off on any tangents with it, but if we were to extract any kind of fees that are going to replace homes up in the Butte fire-affected area, would our revenues in those be up over last year? You know, it's kind of a hard, I guess, are we doing better without that?
Look at your crystal ball.
It's a little fuzzy at the moment. What we saw before the Butte fire was an increase in building permits and in new home builds. Obviously, the Butte fire has significantly impacted that. So at what level, I mean, we're now starting to see people pulling permits. I know that earlier today the board had asked for some statistics regarding how many new home permits have been pulled in the Butte fire area, and we will be getting that information for you. And at that time, we can let you know kind of comparatively to last year, how many of Butte fire, how many are non-Butte fire related, and compare what those revenues might be.
Thanks.
So that's all that I have to present, even though Shirley and Rebecca spoke a lot. Shirley's going to move on to our
Mid-year budget adjustments. And many of what was included in the board packet were technical adjustments related to the auditor's change and procedures for the departmental chargebacks, and I think she did a great job fully talking about what those are. But there were some other mid-year budget adjustments requested by departments. The Human Resources Department is in desperate need of a copier. I don't know how many times I've been in their office, and the gentleman's there with parts strewn all over the floor, and as you can imagine, they make a lot of copies. So they're asking for a capital asset, a new copier printer. And a lot of times what you get when you say I want a color copier is you get a black and white copier that makes colors. Colored copies, this is a colored copier, which adheres to their recruitment, their flyers, and what have you, and that's why it's a little more expensive. So they're asking for that, and then an additional $25,000 in professional and specialized services that went towards negotiations consultant. And basically, we're just moving those funds from the insurance budget because we had significant savings in the workers' comp premium over to the HR department, so there's no bottom line impact to the general fund. The assessor also is in need of a copier, scanner, printer. She has savings in her budget to cover the cost of that capital asset of $12,500. IT and GIS, again, that's just a transfer from the GIS to the IT department of $3,000 to cover. For otherwise, I realized that when I stopped and I got that backwards. From the IT department to GIS to $3,000 to cover overtime costs in GIS. County council, the board had directed county council to retain outside counsel for possible litigation, and that was a $50,000 appropriation additional for the county council's budget, and that does require a draw on contingencies. In elections, they needed additional funding for the live ballot purchase of $18,000. That's offset with the transferring from a designated fund from the HAVA funds, which is election funds. There's also an $8,000 draw on contingencies to cover the printing costs for the RCD election. If you remember, when we were talking about putting that on the ballot, there was a total of $11,000 in cost. $3,000 was staff time, which staff time is staff time, but there were additional printing costs that we got other than their budget with the drawn contingencies. Facilities needed an additional $5,000 for geo maintenance costs that aren't covered under the Kitchell contract, and those are transferred out of the criminal justice facilities designated fund, again with no impact to the general fund. Community org, the Upper Macomb River Watershed Authority, we were notified after final budget was adopted that their dues increased by $1,827, so that was a draw on contingencies to supplement so we could pay the dues. The clerk recorders are a slight reduction in revenues for the passports because they're no longer doing passports, and some vital statistic revenues, and so they didn't have any place in their budget to reduce appropriations to offset that reduction in revenues. So, but they did in their recorded budget. So it's a decrease in revenues in the clerk's budget and a decrease in appropriations in the recorder's budget. The sheriff, I spoke to the sheriff's department. We asked for input for their need for department's needs and technical adjustments, and I was advised that it was critical that they have an additional $40,000 for maintenance of equipment on their automobiles. That will be a draw on contingencies. Probation, they were receiving a little bit more in state and federal revenues, about $15,000 net, that they also offset their appropriations by the same amount. The big one is the coroner's budget. The coroner is seeking an additional $106,000 to increase to professional and specialized services to cover the cost of mortuary services and autopsies. Unfortunately, this has been a pretty rough year, and he had initially budgeted $106,000 for the entire fiscal year, and that was spent in the first half of the year. He has those waiting in the auditor's office to be paid for this to augment his budget. So it is a draw on contingencies. So of the $205,000, $106,000 of it is for coroner. Again, Calavera Style Tutoring was expected to receive an additional $8,400 from state literacy grant donations with an increase to appropriations in their services and supplies. Health and Human Services, the Behavioral Health Services, Mental Health is transferring $637,000 from their special department's expense programs to adult residential care costs to cover in placements. As I said, altogether, the general fund draw on contingencies is $205,827, leaving a balance of just under $1 million in contingency. Additionally, at mid-year, there is one request of a new position. It's for the sheriff's office. It's for business administrator. This is a high-level person that will oversee many complex grants and contracts, oversees the financial and fiscal operations of the department for multiple budget units, purchasing of the department. It's like a number of our other large departments. Public works as a business administrator. I believe Health and Human Services does. It's because of the wide-ranging, complex nature of the business that they need a higher level position. And there is significant salary savings in their current budget to cover the cost of this fiscal year. So talking about budget process and direction, just as a reminder, we are governed by state law of how counties do their budgets, and we're also guided by the board's principles. So the milestones usually start off with us doing the mid-year report, identify key issues, and develop some budget projections. We get the budget instructions out to departments. We got them out on March 3rd. Departments, budgets are due back to the administration, auditor, and human resources by April 1st. For some reason, it's April 1st seems so appropriate since it's April Fool's Day. I don't know. But it's a starting point. It's a starting point for departments. It's a starting point for our office. It's a starting point for the auditor's office that are looking at the projections of revenues. And then we meet with those departments and we go over their budgets. We ask them the questions. We ask them sometimes tough questions about revenues, where you say you're getting this revenue, this much in revenue this year, but last year you only got X amount. Why are you predicting more? Or what are you seeing? What are the trends? You say you need this. Do you need it? Why do you need it? What's the justification? So it's, and if you'll recall last year's budget process, when we came to the board with recommended budget and final budget, it was very smooth, it was very quick, because we were able to sit with departments and work out their issues and come to agreements prior to coming to the board. So the hope is that we can resolve some of the issues at that level during those meetings. Then budget hearings are usually scheduled starting with the first board meeting in June, which is usually the second Tuesday. The share will be the 14th through the 17th, and they go on as long as we need. Departments can make their presentation to the boards. The budget that we adopt by June 30th is mainly a final budget with only technical adjustments being addressed in September. It really is a collaborative process. It involves all the departments, it involves the auditor's office, it involves HR. It really is everybody working together.
I have a quick question. When you get increases like this one from UMRA, and I realize in the scope of things it's not a very big percentage of our budget, but do they even tell you why they want more money? I mean, I went through this with the JPA 12 where they just say, hey, send me another $1,800.
We're part of the JPA. The JPA votes on their budget and what the dues are, and then they send those out. And because we sit on that, that's the vote that.
But that's an increase, though, right? It wasn't.
It is.
It's over what we're paying above and aboard.
Right.
But
I think it took it from 12,000 to 14,000.
A very small percentage of Calaveras County is part of the JPA.
I understand that, but we have several of them, like I just asked. And this is not the only one, Chris.
No, I was just letting you know that, like, East Bay Mud pays almost all of that budget. And so Calaveras County, we get a much better, like, we've gotten millions of dollars that come into our constituents in grant funding through that organization. And we've paid very little amount of dues for that. That's a really good cost benefit return for us.
And quite frankly, the organizations like Area 12 or there are members from this board sitting on those and that are voting members of that board. So the expectation is that you're aware of that and bring that information to our office when you know it. And sometimes it does come in after final budget, which is in the case of our.
Thank you. I don't want to belabor the point. I just appreciate the answer.
Can I ask a question? I seen on there on adult tutoring. So since Pat left, what are we doing with that?
We have interviews for her position scheduled for Thursday.
Thursday.
Okay. Another thing, the jail over here, the old jail. So I went on a tour of it because it just sits there, right? And I'm interested in assessing it so we can figure out what the heck we're going to do with it, because I don't think it'll cost a fortune to tear it down, obviously. And so to assess it, it will cost $8,000 by a person, a regular person that goes in and does that. I don't think we've done that.
We have not at this point. We did some original assessments when the new jail and sheriff's offices was being constructed towards the end of construction. There was estimates of what it would cost to tear it down and abate it, as well as, and there was quite a bit of discussion about whether Measure J funds could be used or not. But council was very clear that that was not a legitimate use of the Measure J funds. At the time, someone, I believe it was our chief building official, went in and did some initial assessment of what it would take to make it useful, and I want to say that the estimate he gave us at the time, I would have to go back and look, was in the neighborhood of $3 million. And that was upgrading wiring, heating and air conditioning, asbestos removal and abatement, lead paint, et cetera, et cetera. It was a ballpark figure. Being that we had no funds set aside for either renovating or tearing it down, yes, it has sat vacant. Since that time, I've had department head come to me and ask about whether or not it was feasible. They had state funding that possibly remodel a portion of the sheriff's office, and it wasn't so much the jail, I believe. And I know that Supervisor Edson, you've been through the jail with some ideas of what you would like to see in there. I'm not aware of we have not gone out to bid to see what the cost would be to have it assessed. We can certainly put those bids out and get that estimate of what it would cost to. I guess it would depend on what your use is. What the board would want to use that is to the level of modifications that have to be made in that facility.
Why don't we?
I thought there had been discussions about using it for potential replacement of storage. So a lot of us are storing the records off-site, so that was limited. It wasn't going to be housed in people, but it could be used to replace some of those storage.
But still, there was still the issue, we would have to somehow encapsulate the asbestos and cordon off areas, because I'm sure the auditor's office with some of your financial records would require a very secure area that nobody else could get into. So, yeah, I mean, there's been talk, about a variety of uses. So we can go in and go out and get a consultant and say, minimally what has to do to make this safe for people to walk in. Or we can say, this is what we're thinking of using it as storage. Or we're thinking of using it to house staff, and what would it take to do that? So you're going to have, when you do an assessment, I believe the person that's doing it has to have some idea what the potential use of the facility is going to be in order to give you an accurate estimate of what needs to be done in there to make it safe.
All right, so I actually took our current building official in there, and And so he wrote me an email saying to get an assessed, it cost about $8,000.
And I can certainly work with the new building official to look at what kind of an assessment he was looking at and what his recommendation would
Right.
be.
And one of the thoughts was that the kitchen, which is, it's actually not in that bad a shape. There's a nonprofit around here, Common Grounds, who right now cooks their meals for Meals on Wheels over in Amador County, and they would like to bring it over here and make it more efficient. So that was one of the thoughts.
Again, it's up to the board's direction as to if you want to do a study session and bring back possible uses. We can have the assessment done of what minimally what needs to be done to the facility and come back and have that discussion with the board as what they see possible uses for.
Great. The other issues I had was OES. I personally would like to see us have a full-time OES director because of what we've been through in the past so many months. And so when do we bring that forward?
Actually, to be perfectly honest, Supervisor Edson, I had a very, and I will say very brief discussion with Captain Macedo when he returned from Virginia. And because OES has resided in the Sheriff's Office for the last 14 years, I believe, and with the passing of Sharon Koontz, I felt, I asked him what he felt about moving OES out of the Sheriff's Department. And he, if I remember correctly, you can correct me if I'm wrong, sure, Captain Macedo, he said he felt uncomfortable making that decision and he thought it would be better served to have that discussion once a new sheriff was appointed. And ultimately, it is the board's decision of what they want to do, but I truly believe that it's important to have that input from the sheriff's office, whether it's with the new sheriff or with current staff.
Okay, so.
But it's something, hopefully we'll have a new sheriff appointed within a reasonable time, and we can bring that forward at recommended budget with some of the options.
So my suggestion is that we have an OES director brought forward or put in place that doesn't work for any department except the Board of Supervisors. Standalone OES director.
Again, how the board wants to handle OES is ultimately a decision of the board, but I suggest, because there are so many components of OES, not just emergency response, I mean, we've seen that with this fire. It's been a continuing process through recovery. I mean, normally with the rim fire, all of what was done through Trumbull County was done through their OES department. And it involves so much more than just response. I think it's well worth having that discussion with the board and the possibility of setting up a standalone department with an OES director. And in that case, you may want to modify county code to be reflective that that is the person in charge when a disaster hits.
Yeah, it's not, I think the sheriff's office did a really great job for what they were asked to do. Matter of fact, since I was there the whole time, I would say they were exemplary. But as I went through this whole process, I've noticed beyond the sheriff's department into everything else, it would have been really helpful to continue to have OES right now operating and helping each of the departments and the county, your department, every other department get through this thing. So including outside agencies and a lot of the churches and the nonprofits, because this fragmented approach has just been exhausting. And so And I think that we need to start as soon as possible.
I absolutely agree that having experts in OES and in this type of a situation would benefit this county enormously. It's hard to do in the middle of a disaster. Departments have stepped up and really worked hard to deal with not only ongoing daily operations, but everything related to the fire and to the recovery. I do believe that we should come back to the board and have a discussion of what this OES department will look like and the funding that will go with it. But, and how quickly you want to do that is up to the board. If you want to wait until you've appointed a new sheriff so that they can weigh in on it, that's fine as well. If you want to do it before that, that is the board's decision.
If we start planning now, it might happen by the end of the year by the way things go. So that's how I feel about it.
And the rest of the board?
I would agree.
I don't know, I mentioned earlier about sheriff, and I was told that was off topic, so I would wait for this one to go with the budget in June.
I'll agree with Supervisor Pani. I think it's a topic worth discussing, but maybe we need to get this topic finished before we go on to the next.
I'm not sure of what we're asking for at this point. Are you asking for an additional, in addition to the budget? Is that what you're asking for? It's like a line item for OES director?
I'm saying that we should probably bring it forward, start planning for it, so that when we do get to the budget, we can roll with it.
Okay, so
You already have OES within the sheriff's department, right? So it would be taking it out of the sheriff's department and moving it into an independent.
That's what I'm hearing.
I'm not interested in taking it out of anything. I'm saying that we need to add an OES director that works for the Board of Supervisors.
OES grant funding goes to the sheriff's department. Isn't that correct?
That is correct.
They receive grant funds from OES to the sheriff's department.
Well, we'll have to work that
So,
out by replacing
right.
that with something else.
That's why I think June is the most appropriate time, because if you pull one little stick out of the whole basket, everything else may tumble.
All right, so I've been experiencing tumble
I agree.
since September.
We all have, Cliff. We all have.
I agree that
You're
it
not
should-
the only one here.
I agree that it should respond directly to the board. Maybe we can bring this back just prior to June so that, during the June budget hearing so that we can get it going in that direction.
I think it's going to take several months to pull this together. I mean, we had OES representatives helping us through this, coming from San Juan County, all over the place. And they weren't from law enforcement. They were more related to an overall approach to emergency response and disaster. So, I think that is what was missing for sure. I think our Sheriff OES did a phenomenal job with evacuation and response on that avenue, but it was the rest of it that we were just kind of bumping into each other. And then this is, we're still struggling trying to get through that even now. I mean, even now I still reach out to other counties to ask them what should we be doing. So I think it takes it's going to take us a long time to delve into that. So I think if we wait until June to even have that discussion, we'll be talking about it.
And I wasn't suggesting that we wait until June and discuss it at budget hearings. I was suggesting as we move through the process, that would be the best place to fund it. In fairness to the Sheriff's Department, the OES department needs to be much more robust. Unfortunately, with the recession hit and the cuts that occurred, those cuts occurred also in OES. So they did not have the level of staffing in that area that they had during some of the earlier fires. And so when response was done, it did get pushed out. And And some of us have not had the experience in dealing with the long-term recovery, and we have been learning as we go. Do I think we need a strong OES director that can manage not only response and recovery, but, or work with the sheriff's office on response and recovery, but the recovery as well? I'm sorry, Dr. Messina, I didn't mean to. You're doing fine. Thanks. I know.
If that is something that the board, Jim Aceto, Sheriff's Office, if that is something that the board is interested in, I would suggest you hold a study session and probably talk to a couple of folks outside the state. You may hear varying opinions. I know that, Office of Emergency Services has been pulled out of sheriff's offices before, and it has worked well. There's times it's been pulled out, and it's been an absolute calamity, and they've hastily put them back in. Shirley is absolutely right. We used to have 6, 7 employees in OES, and if the board recalls, we went to 0 funding one year in OES. We were self-funding just through grants, surviving through grants alone. There's some partial funding back in there. But unfortunately, that's one of the divisions where you kind of do get what you pay for, especially if you have a disaster that hits. If it's not appropriately funded or staffed or supported, then it's difficult to get a lot of bang out of that division. So, in the interest of time, I'll leave it at that. I would recommend a study session if you're truly interested in that direction.
And just some history, it has been, OES resided in the administrative office until, I think it was 2001, 2002, when Clay Hawkins moved over to the sheriff's office as a captain and, handled that there, and then he's resided there since. But a study session definitely makes sense, so the board can weigh in and basically talk about all aspects of it, at what levels to fund it and staff it.
Just real quick comment, having taken a crash course in OES, we can certainly ask our state partners to come in and be part of that if the board wishes to do so. I'm sure they'd be happy to do that as part of your study session.
And scheduling the study session, that's great, and that's probably what should be done. But part of the item number 12 is also asking for recommendations for direction on the budget. And if we're scheduling a study session, as you start to prepare that budget, you should probably include something for OES in it as a standalone department. That's what I'm hearing from everybody.
We will work on that.
Okay, thank you.
I just want to clarify, I don't know if it's standalone or not, but I do see a study session would be helpful to kind of flush that out.
It doesn't have to be, it's just asking for direction on the budget.
And we will work forward through options, and as Brian said, we can talk to our state counterparts, we can talk to surrounding counties. We know how Tuolumne County has a very good OES. So we will bring forward the options to the board, and then it will be up to the board as to how they want to staff and fund that. We can then include that in the budget.
I'm good with that. I can hold my comments until then. There's only a couple other things. I don't even know if it has to do with this. We have that $150,000 from RCRC, the Golden State gave us for the Butte fire, right? Would that include like septics and power and things like that?
They gave us a lot of flexibility, if you'll recall, Supervisor, and so when I brought this to the board, it was for health and sanitary, housing, short-term, and so it does have that ability, especially if they want to hook up a temporary motorhome or camper to septic, or they need to get the septic system fixed or a wellhead fixed. And we set up, as if you recall, I also spoke with the board, we set up the process to work with Calaveras Recovers because they are the ones that are doing the case management. And it's a very simple process. We've already issued one check for temporary housing for, I think it was 3 months rent for somebody while they were waiting to get into an MHU.
$900, right?
Pardon me?
$900.
Something like that, yeah.
And when did we get that grant?
Pardon me?
When did we get that grant?
We got that grant the end of
January 1st?
December. It was right at the end of December because he wanted to cut the check before the calendar end. But we are working with Calaveras Recovers. We have set up a process. If it's for repair of a septic or repair of a well, to provide them health and sanitary conditions. If they go to and speak with the case manager, an application's filled out, they get 2 bids. They tell us who they want to do it. They send us over. We process it to the auditor's office, and they cut a check to the vendor who's going to do the repair.
So I guess my question is, because we received one. And so we have 1 year from we have 1 year to spend money. So
Correct.
does Calaveras Recovers understand the broad uses that can be used for it, or do they believe that it's only for temporary housing?
No, they understand the broad uses, or at least when I met with Kathy Bull and Jean Hayward, sorry, I was one of the old employees last night, we had discussion exactly of what those options that they could use that money for. And in fact, I got an email a week or 2 ago, and it says, do we have to do like the county and get 3 bids on the repairs? And I said, no, but you may want to get at least 2 bids because you want to make sure you're not getting a higher rate, paying something more than you need to. So by getting at least 2 bids, you know that you're within the ballpark. So yes, I do believe they are very much aware that they can be used for things other than temporary housing.
And the other entity that I'm aware that's still doing ongoing temporary housing is Common Grounds for seniors. Have we reached out to them?
It was initially funneled through, recommendation funneled through Calaveras Recovers Case Management. I certainly can reach out to Common Grounds, but I was not aware that they were continuing to house people, but if they are, then we, yes, very much we can use that money for that.
I believe they are. So I think what I've seen is kind of there's probably less and less of that temporary housing going on, except for extreme cases, and then otherwise it's more like they need to pay for the hookup, or they need to, it's something more to connect.
To get them into a housing situation.
I absolutely understand that, and that's why when we discussed it with the board, and we felt that, and we discussed it at the regular meetings, I think we have with Calaveras Recovers is there, and I had that discussion with case management, because the fire victims are encouraged to go through Calaveras Recovers Case Management to help determine their needs, and because the Case Management Committee is aware of what those funds can be used for. But I was not aware that Common Grounds was still providing housing, so I will make that contact.
But I would say, even if they still go through, Calaveras Recovers, but maybe
Yeah, maybe they could have a process that they, just to keep it a
One-stop shop,
yeah.
that was the whole point of it, but I will make Common Grounds aware that they can send.
Because I know that even CCAR is still expending funds on wells and septics and things like that, when they could use, hold back on that, use this up first, and then hold back on that and get down to the nitty-gritty later to help folks, right? Because this has got a 1-year window, and then after that, it's got 45 days to write a check back to them. I don't want to send any money back.
And I will touch base with Kathy Hull, who was my main contact, and make sure that they understand the limitations and that this money should be used for
Yeah, so, there may be a bottleneck there that I'm interested in finding out, since we only have one claim really since January. We heard earlier from somebody else. And so also that kind of leads me to the next, my last discussion. What?
I'm sorry, we've had a request that we need you, staff who's listening to the audio cannot hear the discussion because we're not speaking into the microphones.
So my last
Sorry.
discussion is the Red Cross money that we've received.
We have not received the money as of yet. We just received the purchase order that, from Washington DC, that allocated the money and set it aside. We could not do anything until we received that money. We didn't get the money. We can bill against that PO. So I will be working with HR to get that recruitment out. I have had contact with one of our regional Red Cross people here. She says she has a couple of people who are interested in that position. I see that position as a liaison between the county admin office and Calaveras Recovers to help with those issues.
So Calaveras Recovers may have already volunteers that are there that could be very good at that position.
The recruitment will be open to anyone.
Okay.
Are we ready to continue?
Yeah.
Okay, where was I? So again, I think the board has seen these a number of times. There are the guiding budget principles that the board has adopted in the past. Again, as we move towards budget, the board may want to adjust, change, eliminate. Basically, we want to do rational conservative revenue estimates. I think we are very good at that. I think the auditor's office is good in reviewing what departments estimate in their budgets. Again, the avoidance of one-time solutions, but you can't always avoid them. Sometimes they are necessary. Again, public safety has always been identified as the highest priority. We try and maintain costs by controlling personnel expenditures, and fortunately for us, the bargaining units that we were negotiating with, we have come to agreement with the exception of one small bargaining unit, and we've gotten 18-month extensions of the contract with minimal fiscal impacts. This is an old one, don't believe a promise from the state until a promise actually occurs. I kind of believe that really dates back for a number of years when the state was facing their own significant deficits and were looking to the counties to help close that deficit, and they would promise certain things and not always hold true to them. We want to try and minimize general fund contributions to non-general fund programs that, other than their required match because they do receive state and federal funding. Maintain operations in solid waste, airport, fish, and game funds without general fund contributions. Again, some of these are older. We do not do a general fund contribution to solid waste, to the airport, because it's an enterprise fund, or to fish and game. In general, don't try and balance the budget simply by raising fees, but fees are a part of county budgeting and help to defray the cost on certain services provided. Strive for healthy reserves and a 3 to 4% contingency. Utilize grants for funding that enhance and improve county programs. And hopefully we can support a diverse, prosperous, and sustainable economy. And those are the budget principles by the board. We may at sometime in the very near future want to take a look at those and make changes based on things that have happened over the last 10 years. So going into projections for the 16-17 budget, as in past years, we kind of take the operating funds for the current fiscal year 15-16 and appropriate the estimated revenue and appropriations. And in this case, again, I pulled out the TITA fund and the fire that the TITA fund that was used to balance the budget and fire costs so that we can look at just operating costs at this point. And based on the budget and employee costs that were sent out to departments that the admin office put together, we expect an increase of $1.3 million to salary and benefits. Now that seems like a lot of money, but a good portion of that is because this is the year, we finally made it. It is the 27th pay date occurs in fiscal year 16-17. And as you know, back in 2004-5 or thereabouts, the last time that we said, this is not a good thing, we need to start setting money aside for this extra payday within a budget year. It's not because we have more hours in a work year, it's simply because just like we have 26 pay dates in a year, in a fiscal year, normally. But pay periods in a fiscal year. Every year we get paid every 2 weeks. It's 52 weeks in the year. But sometimes, just like in 2 months out of the year, you end up with 3 pay days instead of 2 pay days. Every so many years, just because of the way the pay dates fall. The first one, I believe, in 2016-17 is like July 2nd, and the last one is like June 29th. And it comes up with an extra pay date. But we have set the money aside. It's in a designated fund. So we have that revenue to offset in department budgets so that they don't get hit with the cost of that increase and have to absorb it. We also, because the health contribution and the increase to uniform allowance was small enough that we'll also cover that out of that paid, that designated fund. I believe we have about $1.2, $1.3 million in there. We have lost some indirect cost plan general fund revenue, about $234,000. Because this is the year of the 27th pay period, it doesn't make sense to put that $125,000 back into the designated fund. We'll just wait and start doing that in the following fiscal year, and as well as the $100,000 for deferred building maintenance. So where does that put us with an initial deficit of almost $4.3 million? The auditor's office went through and looked at where departments were and where they may end up at the end of the year to come up with a cash carry number. It is a most challenging projection because you just don't know how much the department's going to spend throughout the end of the year, whether they will fill the vacant positions that have been empty for the first part of the year, whether revenues will come in. It really is looking at that crystal ball and coming up with your best estimates. And so with that, and then taking the auditor controller's projection and reducing it by withdrawing contingencies, because we know that those contingencies won't roll forward and fall. And we are looking at an estimated fund balance of just over $2.3 million. And then it will require about $1.9 million all total in transfers from TITA to the normal $500,000, the $1.4 million to close the gap. And then this year, for 15-16, the auditor had estimated $1.5 million in TITA funds going in. I reduced that given everything that happened just as a ballpark and went back to the number we had previously used, which was $1 million. So, mind you, this is just crystal ball. looking at it, best guess, we would need to use more of tier funding this coming year to maintain a status quo budget for department general fund contributions. I think it was really a difficult decision for me to make the recommendation for a status quo budget, only because we've come so far, and closing that gap and then now expanding it a little bit is painful for me, because I'm sorry, I'm fiscally conservative. But we also know that departments have been operating with minimal staff. Some of them are just getting by the skin of their teeth. And to ask them to reduce further and cut staff further would be very difficult, especially since they have the added burden of working on recovery and the impacts from the Butte fire. So, as I mentioned, we have closed the budget, and it was a multi-year process. We made some real significant progress. If you remember in 13-14, at the mid-year, we projected if we did nothing, we would have an $8 million deficit. Now, I want to remind you, that's if we did nothing and we had not asked the departments to make cuts, if we hadn't eliminated vacant positions. If we had done nothing, we would have been facing an $8 million deficit. But the board, in their wisdom, said, yes, we agree, we need to sweep the salary savings, put it in contingencies for the first half of the year. We need to ask departments to make reductions anywhere between 8 and 10%. That amounted to $2.2 million in reductions, and that the elimination of a number of vacant positions. Fortunately, we saw property taxes come up a little bit more than we expected, and we saw our reliance on the use of one-time funds reduced from that initial projection of $3.8 million to $1.8 million to under $1 million for this current fiscal year. Unfortunately, with the Butte fire, that really kind of changes the whole ballgame. Fortunately, by doing this, we have the funds in